A California community would be rocked by a brutal homicide committed by one of the most unlikeliest of suspects. Hello, true crimeers. This is the case of Kirsten Costas. Viewer discretion is advised. It was the evening of June 23rd, 1984, in the community of Orinda, California. Orinda at that time was considered a very affluent community, a well-respected community where violence just wasn't really a thing, especially not murder. Well, on that summer night in 1984, a man named Alex Arnold opens his door to a young girl who is knocking on his door. That young girl was Kirsten Costas, a high school student, with her very notable and distinctive curly hair, with a big, bright smile. Well, that particular evening, she seemed a little put off by something. When she knocked on her neighbor's door, she asked if she could get a ride back to her home. She had just been at a party at a local church, and she had tried calling her parents, but her parents unfortunately didn't answer. And so she went to go knock on the house of a person she knows. And so this Alex Arnold person gets into the car with Kirsten and takes her home. Something that Mr. Arnold notices almost right away is that tailing just behind them was a Pinto. Someone driving a Pinto seemed to be following them around. So they finally get to Kirsten's street, and Mr. Arnold pulls up to Kirsten's neighbor's house, because Kirsten lived right across the street. Kirsten gets out of her car, thanks Mr. Arnold, and she begins to walk towards her house. But then he notices that someone in this Pinto stops the car as well, gets out. They're dressed in some sort of trench coat and a hat, and they begin to approach Kirsten and chase her. Kirsten then runs towards her neighbor's front door, but this person in this trench coat immediately takes out a knife and just stabs Kirsten numerous times. This all happened in a matter of seconds, and Kirsten's screams could be heard all over the neighborhood, including, the person who lived in this house, a person who knew Kirsten. They lived across the street from her. He goes outside and he sees Kirsten now on the ground covered in blood. Her assailant has run back to her Pinto, gets in and takes off. And Mr. Arnold, who's still in his car, decides to try to chase or follow this Pinto while the other neighbor is tending to Kirsten. The neighbor who is tending to her, his son calls 911 as all of this is happening. When an ambulance arrives and they take her to the hospital, Kirsten had at least 5 stab wounds in her. Within an hour of arriving at the hospital, 15-year-old Kirsten Costas would be pronounced deceased. Mr. Arnold, who had been trying to pursue the Pinto, somehow they got turned around and they ended up losing the Pinto. They don't know where it went. And so Mr. Arnold then pulls back up to the house where Kirsten had been stabbed. Some people took notice of this and go, oh, what's that about? We saw this car here earlier and now the car is back. And so Mr. Arnold was immediately questioned by police, like, what are you doing here? And he told them the story about what happened. And it sounds like the neighbor who came out to check on Kirsten can confirm, this visually what he saw, that this person who was driving the car, Mr. Arnold, was not the person who stabbed Kirsten. It was obvious to the witnesses that this individual who stabbed Kirsten was a woman, a female. But who on earth would have done this to her? Kirsten was born on July 23rd, 1968. Her mom was a stay-at-home mom, and her father was, I believe, an executive at the 3M company in San Francisco. And Kirsten lived there with her parents and her brother in the affluent community of Orinda. Kirsten attended Miramonte High School, and she was an incredibly popular girl there. She was well-known, well-liked, well-respected. She never had any issues making friends. She had this kind of core group of 4 other girls that were her friends, and Kirsten participated in school sports, and she was also a cheerleader. Kirsten was just simply put your prototypical all-American teenage girl. She represented kind of like what it was to be a teenage girl in the 80s. Not without her flaws. I mean, being a cheerleader, sometimes you can get kind of painted as almost like too popular, maybe stuck up, or maybe a little like mean girl-ish, but Kirsten didn't really fall into that particular category. And because everyone in high school really liked her and she was popular and well known, it was either going to be very easy to find a suspect or very difficult. That's even if the killer was someone from her school. And that was the job the police had to figure out. They learned that on that afternoon, that Kirsten's mom answered a phone call. The call came from what sounded like another young teenage girl who was from a group called the Bobolinks at the high school. It was basically sort of similar to a sorority in a college, but this was a volunteer program at the high school. And if you were a part of it, you were a part of a very special clique there in school. And Kirsten and a couple of her friends were invited to join the Bobolinks. And so this phone call that her mom took that day said, hey, we're having this little potluck get-together thing, and we would like to know if, you could tell Kirsten that she's invited. That same evening, however, there's also a little pool party type thing going on at this nearby church, which is what Kirsten ends up attending. And then a couple of hours later, she is murdered on the front lawn of her neighbor's home. A lot of theories kind of surrounded this community. There was at one point, they floated out this theory that, Kirsten kind of was sort of like a representation, like I said earlier, of what it was like to be a teenage girl in the 80s, but she was also a representation of Orinda, California as a whole. This very kind of wealthy, well-to-do community, and there were people outside of it who resented this type of community. And there was this idea thrown out there that maybe someone killed Kirsten because she was a well-known member of the community and they wanted to, stick it to the community by killing one of them. But that would have been a very difficult theory to confirm. And eventually it got down to a point where it sounded like, because police had interviewed hundreds of people, they interviewed all of her friends, all the people who were at that party that night, they interviewed obviously her family, everyone they can think of, and to figure out, who may have wanted to do this. And ultimately, police were having a really hard time kind of figuring it out. So they would enlist the help of the FBI, and that's when an FBI profiler becomes involved. And I will never understand how profiling actually works and how it's always, not always, but usually so effective and so accurate. I don't get it. I don't understand it. But there are people who do, including profilers. And so the FBI profile took everything, like, for example, the weapon that was used, a knife. A knife is something that is very personal and it's meant to cause pain. And so they took that and they took many other aspects of the crime, the victim, and they came up with this profile that whoever killed Kirsten almost completely likely knew her and knew her well. As a matter of fact, the profile said that she was probably a friend of Kirsten's, someone who also did not come from a well-to-do, wealthy family like Kirsten did. Someone who was in a part of a big family with a lot of siblings. This person was probably between the ages of 16 to 18 years old or so. And so that helped everyone narrow it down to, oh my God, this was a fellow student who killed her. So through investigating people closest to her, they would talk to a friend named Bernadette Prati, who would end up giving police an alibi. But police, during the initial part of this investigation, did not verify a lot of these alibis, including Bernadette's. When the profile was released to the public, Bernadette's mom read about it in the paper, and that scared Bernadette. She would end up writing a letter to her mom. She told her mom, please wait 30 minutes before you open this letter and read it. And her mom did just that. Bernadette left the house. Her mom set a timer for 30 minutes, and when that timer went up, she opened the letter from Bernadette. Bernadette Prati was a good friend of Kirsten's. They were part of the same group of girls who were close. Bernadette had tried out for the cheerleading squad, like sometime a few months prior to this, but she was denied. Bernadette was popular, but she wasn't as popular as Kirsten and some of her other friends. Bernadette felt like because she did not come from the same type of family, that she felt like, I'm not on their level. but she wanted to be on their level. At any rate, Bernadette's mom opens this letter. It's a confession letter. Her daughter, Bernadette, confesses to stabbing and murdering Kirsten Costas. Bernadette would also admit that she was the one who called Kirsten's mom that evening and invited her to this bobolinks thing, which turns out wasn't even happening. It was a lie. That was Bernadette's way of luring Kirsten out of the house. You know, Bernadette's mom is obviously just like completely gutted and shocked by this letter, and eventually it leads to police arresting Bernadette because she flat out confessed. And then when she sat down with police, she would also tape a confession that she was the one to do it. In this taped confession, Bernadette at one point said to police, quote, "Do I have to go back to Miramonte, the high school? I can't live if it is known. I would rather die." End quote. So she's thinking that despite her confessing to a murder, she's going to actually be able to go back to school, which she didn't want to do. But they're like, no, you've killed someone. You're under arrest. So at this church gathering at the party, Bernadette, I guess, approached Kirsten. They were having a conversation, just talking like friends. The conversation of Bernadette not making the cheerleading squad, and she was also denied to be on the yearbook team, said she told Kirsten that she was upset by this. She was mad. She was upset that she wasn't as popular as Kirsten and the other girls. And I guess at some point there's this vibe, or maybe Kirsten says it, but something along the lines that Bernadette felt that Kirsten thought Bernadette was extremely weird, that she was being very strange, very weird. And that is what set Bernadette off. Bernadette did not want the rest of the school to know she was weird, apparently. That Bernadette was maybe a little stalkerish, maybe a little creepy. And this is actually confirmed because when Kirsten first spoke to Mr. Arnold, the guy who gave her the ride back to her street, she actually told Mr. Arnold, yeah, I was just with a friend who was acting very weird. She said to him that this friend went weird. So she ends up basically following Kirsten home that night. She stalks her basically as she goes to the neighbor's house to ask for a ride. And she ends up getting into her Pinto, which is confirmed that Bernadette owns a Pinto, or her family does, and that's what she was driving that night. So that can corroborate the fact that Mr. Arnold saw this Pinto kind of driving closely behind him as they were going back to Kirsten's neighborhood. And then as Kirsten was beginning to cross the street to go towards her house, that's when Bernadette got out and basically chased her back, and stabbed her. Now, Bernadette says that this murder wasn't planned. This was not premeditated. That the knife just so happened to be in the car at that time. This was a shared vehicle. And later on, Bernadette's sister would go on the stand at trial and say, well, yeah, I usually would keep a large knife in my car to cut fruits and vegetables, to snack on. The prosecutors and the police thought that was extremely odd because this wasn't like this was like a butcher's knife. This is a big knife. It's not it's not like it's impossible. It's just strange that someone would keep a large butcher knife in their car for cutting fruits and vegetables. And police also would verify that Bernadette's alibi that she gave initially that was not investigated from the get-go turned out not to be true, and that she had no alibi for the time of the murder. So Bernadette is arrested and charged with murder, and the prosecution wanted to go for first-degree murder, that this was a planned thing. The trial of Bernadette lasts about 3 days or so, but the prosecution was never able to establish that this truly was premeditated. They were only able to really prove that this was a murder that happened kind of just in the heat of the moment. But you also have, why did Bernadette lure or attempt to lure Kirsten out of her home for this non-existent bobolinks get-together? There was also something else she brought up because that night, Bernadette did actually pick Kirsten up to go to this gathering that they eventually went to. And she says at one point, Kirsten offered her pot or marijuana, and Bernadette said no. She said I just didn't want to do it, and she made me feel dumb for not wanting to do it. And so that, I guess, also led into this it's strange because you have elements that she may have been planning something, but was it murder per se? And it does sound like It stemmed from this conversation she had with Kirsten at this little pool party thing, where Kirsten was basically saying Bernadette is weird, and Bernadette didn't want to be known as the weird girl at school. She didn't want to be known as trying to become too involved in this big friends group or whatever. I don't know. I don't get it. But that is what set her off. And so she ends up following Bernadette back home, and apparently in the heat of the moment stabs her with a knife that was apparently already in the car. And so the only thing the prosecution was truly able to prove was second-degree murder, that this was an unplanned murder. Bernadette Proddy was convicted and sentenced to just 9 years in prison, in which she only served 7. She was 16 at the time of the trial, and so this is all happening under, she's a minor. And so usually when a minor commits a crime, you get a much, much less sentence because you're a kid. Some of you know my feelings about this, and I'll say it again. If you are a human who knowingly and willingly commits a murder, you should be treated equally as everyone else. Sorry, but you should be punished just as badly as everyone else does. Because it almost is telling kids, like, hey, you can go kill someone. You're not going to get in that much trouble. You go to jail for a couple of years, but then you get right back out and still live the rest of your life. That's what you're telling kids. Like, it's okay to just go out there and murder. Oh, and then they go, oh, but I'm a kid. I can't, I didn't know any better. Bernadette stabbed this girl and then left her to die. Stabbed her 5 times. Stalked her on her way home, stabbed her 5 times, and left her to die on that person's front yard, and then fled the scene. That is cold and calculated. She knew what she was doing. She knew what she was doing as she stabbed Kirsten. Stabbed her once. Okay, oh my God, what am I doing? And then another time, then another time, and then another time, and then another time. It's frustrating. She got 9 years. She only served 7. She was released, I think, in 1992, where eventually she would change her name. She moved out of state, and I don't know where her whereabouts are to this day. In terms of motives, it is one of the strangest ones I've ever seen. A teenage girl didn't want to be considered or called weird at school, and that was enough to make her murder someone. But what was her motive for luring her out in the first place? That's my question. What was she initially planning to do? If murder wasn't the plan, what was the plan? But in the end, it doesn't really matter. I mean, what happened, happened. She killed someone. And wherever she is out there, people may not know who she is, but she is still living with that for the rest of her life, that she ended a child's life. She was a child too, yes, but she ended the life of another child. While Bernadette, she got a slap on the wrist basically, and she was still extremely young when she was released from prison. She got a chance to, get married, maybe, have kids, maybe eventually have grandkids, and she gets to watch all those kids grow up. She gets to live. She gets to live free. And Kirsten does not. Kirsten died at the age of 15 on someone's front lawn after being stabbed 5 times. That's not fair. That's not justice. But what do I know? I'm just some guy. Kirsten Costas was just a beloved member of this school and of this community. She was just a teenage girl. She was popular, well-liked. Again, she was just a teenage girl, She never got a chance to graduate high school or do any of those other things that Bernadette would eventually get to do. And that's sad. That's really, really sad, and that's extremely tragic. And in the end, Kirsten Costas didn't really get the justice that she very rightfully deserved. But that is it for this case. True crime, a Rooney, a Dooney, a Dingleberry Dongs. I hope you found it interesting. As usual, if you are new here, hello, my name is Mike. I tell true crime stories here on YouTube, obviously. So please subscribe, give this video a like, leave a comment below, share the video on other platforms if you want to, and also hit the bell to be notified when I post other videos, which is, again, multiple times a week. So yeah, please subscribe. I would really appreciate it. Trying to get to 100,000 subscribers. That would be neat. I also tell short form true crime stories over on TikTok. The link to my TikTok is in the link tree, which is in the description of this video below. Feel free to follow it. I actually have 2 pages over there. Feel free to follow both of them if you want. But I do post compilation videos of all my TikTok videos every month over here as well if you don't use TikTok. Because who knows what's going to be around in another month or 2. Also in that link tree below, you'll find my case list. The case list is public. You can view it. You just can't add to it. It's got 6,800 plus names on it. It's in alphabetical order for the most part. So if you scroll through it and you cannot find a name that you want me to cover, just send me a really quick email with the name and where it happened, when it happened. I'll add that name to my list, and I'll get to that case eventually. If you are a loved one of a victim, like a cold case, unsolved murder, or a missing person, please let me know in the email that I can make sure that case gets covered before anyone else. I want to prioritize cases directly from loved ones if you are one. Otherwise, I pick my cases at random, because usually people recommend cases to me because they saw it on Forensic Files or some various true crime show, and they just wanted to throw that name out there. But at any rate, robot. Anyway, at any rate, what? I don't know what that was. That is it for this video, True Crime Roonies. I'm unstable. And so until the next case, ta-ta for nowsy poopsies. No.